Chapter 5, Nonverbal Communication. What is nonverbal communication? The definition of nonverbal communication is behaviors and characteristics that convey meaning without the use of words. Nonverbal communication works both independently of and in conjunction with verbal messages to clarify meaning. Now we're going to talk about some functions of nonverbal communication. The first one is message reinforcement or complementation. This is where nonverbal cues reinforce the verbal message by adding redundancy. This is when a hey, how are you doing is accompanied by a strong wave of your hand. Hi, and waving your hand at the same time. Or when I ask, was the test easy? And you reply yes, accompanied by a thumbs up. Message reinforcement occurs when the nonverbal and verbal messages complement each other. Number two of the functions of nonverbal communication is message negation. And message negation is when nonverbal cues contradict or negate a verbal message. This is when the verbal message is canceled by the communicator's nonverbal cues. Message negation occurs when nonverbal cues and the words spoken are at odds with each other, creating the double message. The nonverbal cues usually reflect the more accurate meaning of the message. Number three of the functions of nonverbal communication is message substitution. This is when nonverbal cues replace or substitute for verbal cues. Message substitution, in this case, instead of words being spoken, an action is performed. For example, pointing at someone, shrugging shoulders, placing your finger over your lips to let someone know to please be quiet. Number four of the five functions of nonverbal communication is message accentuation or intensification. This is when nonverbal cues are used to underscore or intensify parts of a verbal message. For example, slowing down your speech to stress the meaning and importance of key words. And number five is message regulation. And this is when nonverbal cues help regulate the back and forth flow of person to person interaction. This is when we indicate conversational turn taking when non with nonverbal cues. With eye contact, posture, gestures, and voice, we signal that we have finished speaking or indicate who should talk next. In this instance, nonverbal cues are traffic signals, if you will, for verbal exchanges. Now, as we discussed, we use language to communicate explicit information and message content. We use nonverbal communication to convey relational messages, including how we feel about another person, as well as status, power, and deception. Now, let's talk about some aspects of nonverbal communication. The first one is one that we're all familiar with, and it's body language or kinesics. Kinesics is the scientific term for body language. Motion of the body that includes facial expressions, right, your eyebrows, your forehead, your eyes and mouth, your posture, which is our physical stance for sitting and standing, and gestures, movement of our arms, legs, hands, and feet. Number two of aspects of nonverbal communication is clothing and artifacts. How we dress is extremely important in creating a first impression. How we dress influences how we behave. So we certainly wouldn't dress up in a suit to go to the beach, right? And we wouldn't dress up in a Halloween costume for an important political event. And this woman can't move very much to do too many things in the outfit that she's wearing. Number three of the aspects of nonverbal communication is voice or paralanguage, which are elements of speech that are not standard words. For example, mm-hmm, huh, uh-uh, mm, mm, mm. Paralanguage or voice also includes the volume of your voice, the degree of loudness, the pitch, the highness or lowness of your voice. Now, silence can mean many things. Silence can mean time needed to organize your thoughts. It could also mean that you're about to share something important, or it could be a message of disconfirmation. Remember, we talked about that? Indifference felt towards another person. Silence could mean a message of anger, a message of shyness or agreement, or that you simply have nothing to say. A good example of how nonverbal communication can be ambiguous at times. Number four of the aspects of nonverbal communication is space and distance. Now, Edward Hall, author of The Hidden Dimension, uses the term proxemics for human beings' use of space. Now, proxemics refers to A, the space that exists between us as we talk and relate to each other, as well as B, the way we organize the space around us in our homes, offices, and communities. Seating patterns also influence our communicative behaviors. Remember, we talked about how our clothing can influence our behaviors, so can our seating patterns. Now, Hall's model lists four distances that we keep between ourselves and other people, depending on the type of encounter and nature of the relationship. So, number one of Hall's four distances kept between ourselves and others is intimate distance. Now, intimate distance is 0 to 18 inches. Okay, so it's really from your point of touch to 18 inches from the other person. Now, a lot of times we get this intimate distance confused with personal distance. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But intimate distance is the space that we really do not share with anyone other than our loved ones. Okay. Have you ever had someone come too close to you and you wanted them to back off? Or did you back away yourself? We don't like people in our intimate distance that we don't invite in. Number two of Hall's four distances kept between ourselves and others is personal distance. Okay, so personal distance is 18 inches to 4 feet. This is the most common distance between people talking informally in class, at work, or at parties. We conduct most of our conversations within this range. Now, if we reduce personal distance to intimate distance, we are likely to make the other person feel uncomfortable. As we said, we don't like people in that distance unless we invite them in. Now, if we increase that distance, the personal distance, the other person is likely to feel rejected. And they're wondering, why are you moving so far away? Number three of Hall's four distances kept between ourselves and others is social distance. Now, social distance is between 4 feet to 12 feet. Now, this is about arm's length. At this distance, we generally communicate information and feelings that are not particularly private or revealing. We conduct conversations at meals and at business conferences or meetings uh, at this distance. So, this is usually like at the workplace. The primary protector of social space is the desk. Okay. And remember, the greater the distance between people, the more formal their encounters are. And number four of Hall's four distances kept between ourselves and others is public distance. And public distance is 12 feet to your limit of sight. This distance is commonly reserved for strangers that we do not care to have an interaction with. Now, sometimes we are forced into intimate distance with strangers in crowded public places. Now, did you ever notice when you're waiting for an elevator how you and others use public distance when the lobby is not crowded? When it's not crowded and you walk into a lobby and there's two people standing there, usually you don't stand next to each other closely. Usually one person is at one end and the other person is at another. Usually about 4 to 6 feet away from each other. Okay, and then once the elevator opens, now we're forced into that intimate space with strangers that we really feel uncomfortable with. And if it's crowded in that elevator, we hold on to our intimate space. And as people leave out of the elevator, you will notice the shift of everyone in the elevator to create as much distance between themselves and others on the elevator. And of course, that was pre COVID. So I think we can just imagine what it's like when people have to get into these, are forced into these intimate um, spaces, distances that we don't really care to be in with other people unless we invite them in. Number five of the aspects of nonverbal communication is colors. Now, colors affect us emotionally and physiologically, believe it or not. Now, researchers claim that red tends to excite the nervous system. Red is supposed to be warm and bright, not intimidating. Red is the lifeblood. Researchers claim that blue tends to make people calmer. One study proved that 70% of U.S. companies associate with the color blue and have names and corporate logos that are blue. According to the executive director of the Pantone Color Institute, blue is connected to sky and water. The sky has never fallen, and water has never gone away. Blue is dependable and constant. And we see a lot of like hospitals, they like to use the color blue, insurance companies, people that want to stress their dependability and reliability. Now, green is supposed to represent harmony and the environment. Number six of the aspects of nonverbal communication is time. The scientific term for time is chronemics. Chronemics. It is the study of how we use time to communicate. We formulate opinions about people based on their perceptions or values of time. For example, people who are always late versus people who are always early, or people who waste time versus people who use their time wisely. People from slower paced cities are sometimes perceived way differently than people from past fast-paced cities. Number seven of the aspects of nonverbal communication is touch, or the scientific term haptics. Haptics. Now, touch is usually the amount of touching we do or find acceptable, which is culturally conditioned. How we use touch sends many messages about us. It reveals our perceptions of status, our attitudes, and even our needs. Touch functions importantly in sexual communication as well. And finally, we have smell or olfactics. Number eight of the aspects of nonverbal communication. Olfactics or smell. The study of the sense of smell. Okay, that's seven there, but that should say eight. I'm sorry about that. Smell olfactics. Associated with attraction, often triggering our emotions or romantic feelings. I don't know how many people realize the base of a lot of the perfumes and colognes that we wear. Scientists, chemists use smells that attract the opposite sex when making fragrances. So the base of all fragrances are those that mimic a natural smell of the opposite sex. Now, smell also aids in memory recall because if you smell certain things, it logs in your memory and you can never forget that smell. We all use nonverbal cues to create false impressions in others. Sometimes we do it to save face or protect ourselves from the embarrassment that bluntness can cause. But truth, deception, and nonverbal communication is something that we all need to be mindful of because sometimes we do it to take advantage of those with whom we are interacting. Now, people tend to pay closer attention to the nonverbal cues of people we don't trust or who we suspect may be lying to us than we do to the rest of the people we interact with. Some people are better at nonverbal deception than others. We tend to look at professionals such as lawyers, diplomats, and salespersons as people who oftentimes act differently than they feel. And I thought that this picture was particularly appropriate because if you recall this photo, it was after many world leaders were talking about our president, Trump, behind his back and mocking him. And when President Trump got word of it, in particular, they were talking about Justin Trudeau, and President Trump called uh, Justin Trudeau two faced. And then Justin Trudeau called him two faced. So it was just a back and forth. uh, politicians going at one another. Now, research tells us that the older we get, the better we become at being good liars. Now, how do we detect when people are lying? Usually by being more watchful. Because we can't say that any one nonverbal cue 100% indicates someone is lying. There are certain nonverbal clues to deception. Therefore, you must consider the context of the behavior in relation to someone lying to you. Some clues to deception include a change in expression of the face, a movement of the body, a vocal inflection, a deep or shallow breath, a long pause, a slip of the tongue, a microfacial expression, and an ill timed or inappropriate gesture. Examples: eye blinking, hand fidgeting, posture shifting, making speech errors, rising pitches, and hesitation are all signals that someone may be committing deception upon us. But notice that I said may. As stated previously, we can't say that any one nonverbal cue 100% indicates someone is lying, but we must be mindful that nonverbal communication is ambiguous. Okay, we don't always know what the nonverbal communication is signaling to us. We have to consider a lot of different things: the situation, environment, the people, uh, a lot of different things before we rush to judgment. Therefore, be careful not to misinterpret nonverbal cues. You want to be alert, you want to be mindful, and you want to be a critical thinker. And this concludes Lecture 5 on nonverbal communication.